Statements. People in these kinds of relationships often get trapped inside toxic echo chambers. They keep asking themselves, statements, is it me? And at the same time, they are being told, yes, it's you. The only voice they hear again and again, statements, is the voice of the malignant narcissistic person repeating, you're the problem. So that raises an important question, statements. Is love bombing actually a form of grooming? Let's really look at that idea. The word grooming has very dark and uncomfortable meanings for many people, statements, but at its most basic level, grooming is a process of preparing someone for abuse. It is about building trust, using a person's vulnerabilities, statements, and slowly moving them into a psychological position where they are easier to exploit, statements. We often hear this term in discussions about predators who target children or teens because being young automatically makes someone more vulnerable, statements. But grooming does not only happen to children. Grooming can happen to people of any age. Statements. What is truly frightening and deeply troubling is that abusers seem to have an almost uncanny ability to sense who is vulnerable and then use that vulnerability. Statements. If they encounter someone who quickly shows that they are not susceptible to these tactics, the abuser often moves on to another target. They recognize, statements, very early who is not a good candidate for grooming. So I am going to say it plainly. I do believe that love bombing is a form of grooming. Statements. Love bombing creates a courtship or seduction that is designed to pull someone into the role of narcissistic supply. Statements. It puts a person in a position where it becomes very hard to leave the relationship until the love bomber decides they are finished with them. Statement. It is about control. It is about power. It is about creating a situation where the love bomber can later devalue and discard the other person. Statements. That process actually feels good to the love bomber because their sense of identity often comes from being dominant, from being the one in charge. Statements. From feeling superior. Love bombing is confusing by nature. It overwhelms the person on the receiving end. It plays directly on emotional vulnerabilities, statements, because so much is happening so fast during that stage. It blocks the natural process of slowly getting to know someone, statements, a process that allows people to make healthy and grounded decisions about a relationship. Love bombing is a setup. It taps into early wounds, statements, early longings, and early emotional triggers, and it makes people more likely to fall for someone who feels strangely familiar. It's often because that person resembles earlier unhealthy relationships, such as a narcissistic parent. Instead of choosing a healthy adult partner, statements, they may choose someone who rejects them or controls them in the same way a parent once did. This is why even people who have been in therapy, statements, who have done a lot of inner work, can still be pulled in by a love bomber. Those early wounds and vulnerabilities never fully disappear. Statements. When most people think of love bombing, they picture the classic grand version. The grand love bomb includes fancy dinners, expensive gifts, statements, trips and vacations, dramatic gestures, and over-the-top behavior. It is the person who wants to order everything on the menu, who sends flowers every day, statements, who texts good morning and good night constantly, who floods social media with posts about how lucky they are, filled with hearts and emojis, statements declaring forever after just 2 weeks. It is loud, it is flashy, it is distracting, and it can blind you to red flags. If you question it, statements, you may even feel guilty, like you are the negative one for seeing something wrong in what looks like a fairy tale romance. Statements. But the truth is that this grand style is only one form of love bombing. There is also a quieter version. Statements. Sometimes love bombing looks like someone sharing endless stories of pain and hardship, everything that has gone wrong in their life. Statements. All the tragedy in their personal story. They tell you that you are the first person who has ever really understood them or truly loved them. Statements. This quiet love bombing can actually be even more dangerous because it is subtle. The big dinners and dramatic gestures are obvious and in your face. Statements. The quiet version feels softer, gentler, and more sincere. It can play on a deep and primitive need to feel seen, to feel empathic, to feel special. Fantasy that their love can save or heal someone else. Quiet love bombing feeds directly into that fantasy. Statements. Whether the love bombing is loud or quiet, eventually the pleasurable stage ends. Usually somewhere between 4 and 12 weeks, Statements. The devaluing phase slowly begins. Narcissists are sprinters, not marathon runners. They cannot keep up love bombing forever. Statements. They do it until they feel they have you, and then the energy shifts. It is like closing a sale. Think about how charming a salesperson can be before you sign the contract and how quickly that charm fades afterward. With grandiose love bombers, statements, the shift often shows up as criticism. They start telling you that you are ungrateful, selfish, or too needy. Statements. They act offended that you want real emotional connection after everything they have done for you. When you try to deepen the relationship, statements, they may accuse you of being entitled. In some cases, they even start calling you narcissistic, selfish, or demanding. Statements. Because narcissistic relationships are full of cognitive dissonance, you may actually believe them. Statements. You may start questioning yourself and wondering if you really are too needy or unfair. Statements. Especially when you remember all the big things they did for you in the beginning. With quiet love bombers, the devaluing can look different. Statements. It often shows up as passive-aggressive behavior. You might think that this wounded, sensitive person will eventually want to hear more about your life. Statements. You might start sharing good news or personal successes. But instead of celebrating with you, they might respond with comments like, statements, why do you feel the need to tell me all this? Or are you trying to make me feel bad about myself? Over time, if this happens enough, statements, you start censoring yourself. You stop sharing your wins. You may even stop striving or excelling. Statements, because you do not want to upset them or make them feel inadequate. Your life slowly shrinks to protect their fragile emotional state. Statements. There are other forms of love bombing that people do not always recognize. One is what I call the lapdog love bomb. In this version, statements, the person wants to be with you all the time. Remember, moving too fast is a common narcissistic tactic. They call constantly. They text constantly. They want to know where you are, what you are doing. They may travel long distances just to see you, drive for hours, or show up unexpectedly. Statements. Very early on, you might find them sleeping over, or at least waking up to a flood of messages every morning. This quickly becomes an everyday pattern. Statements. These relationships often rush toward big commitments. Engagement, moving in together, talking about babies. Statements. Declaring you are the one. They say things like, this kind of connection only happens once, or you are my everything. It may not look flashy. Statements. But if you have fears around abandonment or separation, this kind of love bombing can feel incredibly comforting. The person never leaves. Statements. There are no goodbyes because they are always there. After just a few months, statements. You may have spent more time with this person than couples who have been together for a year. Statements. They blend into your routine so completely that it becomes easy to imagine them as a permanent part of your life. But over time, statements, this closeness turns into control. After weeks or months of constant contact, you might want a little space. Statements. Maybe you want to see friends or spend time with family. The lapdog love bomber may respond with guilt-inducing questions like, statements, are you ashamed of me? Or, why don't you want me there? This happens after months of nonstop togetherness. Statements. They may pressure you to quit your job or accuse you of wanting to meet someone else when you are simply running errands or spending time with loved ones. Statements. Different people are vulnerable to different styles of love bombing. People who love romance, gifts, and grand gestures, statements, or who are coming out of relationships where their needs were ignored, may be especially drawn to grandiose love bombers. Statements. People who see themselves as empaths who take pride in helping others may be more vulnerable to quiet love bombers. Statements. They may not notice that they are not truly being seen because they are so focused on listening and supporting. Statements. People with abandonment fears may be drawn to someone who never leaves their side. Our personal histories shape our vulnerabilities, statements, and those vulnerabilities are what allow grooming through love bombing to work. Statements. Someone who dislikes big gestures may actually be turned off by grand love bombing while being pulled in by something quieter. Statements. Although love bombing is most often discussed in romantic relationships, it can also appear in friendships, families, and workplaces. Statements. It is common in new relationships, but it can also happen in long-standing ones. If a narcissist wants something you have, statements, they may suddenly shower you with attention and affection to get it. This can even happen within families or between siblings. Statements. So, how do we stop this grooming process called love bombing? I am not sure there is an easy answer. Statements. Maybe it starts with not teaching children fairy tales about rescue and saving others and not glorifying those dynamics as adults. Statements. Maybe it means learning not to equate having needs with being needy and not feeling guilty for expressing those needs. Statements. Maybe it means learning to see red flags not as decoration, but as warnings like a storm rolling in on a beach day. You may want to stay. Statements, but you do not want to get struck. Statements. Maybe we need to stop judging people who choose to be single and instead help people feel comfortable with their own company. Statements. So they can be more selective when choosing a partner. Even then, many of us will probably get pulled into a narcissistic relationship at least once. Statements. Think about the narcissistic relationship you were in, whether romantic or a friendship. What made that person appealing at first? Was it their looks? Statements, intelligence, shared values, background, money, charm, confidence, fun, status, or credentials? Did they make you feel needed or useful? Did they listen? Statements. Or was it simply the right place at the right time? That is an exercise worth doing. We meet interesting people all the time, statements, but we do not always keep spending time with them. Something made you want to keep going back, and then something else made you stay. Statements, attraction brings us in, but what keeps us there can include comfort, routine, familiarity, and inertia. In healthy relationships, statements, those things can grow into deep connection. In narcissistic ones, they can turn into feeling stuck. Statements. Staying in a relationship and being stuck are not the same. Staying feels like moving forward. Being stuck feels like confusion and distress. Statements. There is often a moment when the story changes, when you realize something is wrong, but you do not know what to do. Statements. That is when questions like, is it me or is it them, start taking over. That is why understanding narcissistic dynamics matters. Statements. Feeling stuck can look different depending on whether you are dealing with grandiose, vulnerable, or malignant narcissism. And the reasons you feel trapped will vary with each type. Statements. Here is a lightly rewritten version that keeps the meaning, flow, and emotional weight the same, slightly changes wording throughout. Stasa does not shorten the content, uses our simple English, has a no headings, and is expanded well beyond 15 statements, 1,000 characters while staying faithful to the original message. They may show vulnerable traits, like constantly playing the victim. Statements. Or they may show grandiose traits, such as being charming, confident, and impressive when they are in public or surrounded by people. But overall, statements, malignant narcissistic people are willing to be cruel. They are often cruel by nature, deeply and consistently cruel. And after being cruel, statements, they behave as if that cruelty is justified. They may downplay what they did, deny the harm, or claim that their behavior was misunderstood. Statements. They often say things like, it wasn't that bad, you're too sensitive, or you took it the wrong way. Statements. They rewrite reality so that their meanness seems acceptable or reasonable in their own mind. Statements. People who are in relationships with malignant narcissists often feel trapped, and that fear is real and valid. They are afraid for good reason. Statements. After separation, abuse is very likely to occur. This is especially true because coercive control is much more common in these kinds of relationships. Coercive control means constant monitoring, intimidation, manipulation, and pressure that slowly takes away a person's freedom and sense of safety. Statements. These relationships involve extremely high levels of manipulation, but it doesn't stop there. The manipulation is often combined with isolation. Over time, statements, the person becomes cut off from friends, family, and outside perspectives. People stuck in these relationships are living inside toxic echo chambers. Statements. In these echo chambers, they keep asking themselves the same painful question again and again. Is it me? They start doubting their own thoughts, statements, their own feelings, and their own judgment. And at the same time, they are being told directly, yes, statements, it is you. The malignant narcissistic person repeats it constantly. They say, you're the problem. This is your fault. Statements. You caused this. And because the victim has been isolated, that voice becomes the loudest and sometimes the only voice they hear. Over time, statements, that repeated message sinks in deeply. The confusion that grows inside this situation is overwhelming. It is mentally exhausting and emotionally crushing. Statements. Even while this intense self-doubt is happening internally, there is also a very real and rational fear about what might happen if they try to leave. Statements. Many people think, what will they do to me if I walk away? That fear is not imagined. Malignant narcissistic partners are highly skilled at manipulation. Statements. Not only of their children, but also of other adults around them. They are very good at controlling the narrative. They can turn friends, family members, statements, coworkers, teachers, lawyers, and even court systems toward their version of the story. They convince others to believe their lies, statements. They make themselves look reasonable, calm, and misunderstood while painting the other person as unstable, dramatic, or dishonest, statements. They often use money as a weapon. Financial control is a major tool for them. They also use their social status, their job, their reputation, statements, and their influence in the world to make life extremely difficult for someone who considers leaving. In some cases, statements becomes not just difficult but genuinely dangerous. Statements. The combination of entitlement and cruelty in a malignant narcissistic person means they truly believe they deserve whatever they want. Statements. They believe they are owed access, control, admiration, obedience, and power. When they don't get what they think they deserve, statements, they feel justified in punishing the other person. Malignant narcissistic people are often extremely vindictive. Statements. There is a sadistic and punishing side to this form of narcissism. This means they don't just want to win, they want the other person to suffer. Statements. Because of this, the period after separation is rarely just a few angry messages or brief conflict. Instead, it can turn into a long, statements, terrifying campaign that lasts for years. This can include threats, revenge behavior, stalking that may be subtle or obvious, harassment, and intimidation. Statements. It can include technology-based abuse, such as tracking, hacking, constant messages, or public smear campaigns online. It can include legal abuse, statements, where the court system is used as a weapon to drain time, money, and emotional energy, and all of this is very real. This is not exaggeration. Statements. This happens again and again. Anytime I have helped guide someone through a divorce or separation from a malignant narcissistic partner, statements, they have looked at me and said something very painful. They often say, if I had known it would be this hard, statements, I'm not sure I would have started this process. That statement shows just how severe and consuming the experience can be. Eventually, statements, many people do feel relief when they reach the other side. They feel stronger, safer, and clearer once it is truly over. Statements. But while they are in the middle of it, and especially when it drags on for years, the toll is enormous. Statements. Many people develop serious physical health problems during this time. They experience severe anxiety that feels unmanageable. Some develop depression, panic attacks, or symptoms that look like chronic illness. Others face complete financial devastation. Savings disappear, careers are damaged, legal costs pile up. The stress affects sleep, immune systems, and overall well-being. The fear, both internal and based in reality, statements, becomes the main reason people feel stuck in malignant narcissistic relationships. Statements. The true crime world is filled with stories showing the worst possible outcomes that can happen when someone tries to leave a malignant narcissistic partner. Statements. These stories are extreme, but they are not imaginary. And even outside of those extreme cases, statements, there are countless family court stories that never make the news. These involve years of harassment, ongoing legal battles, severe financial abuse, and survivors who live with symptoms of complex trauma for a very long time. Many survivors continue to struggle with trust, safety, statements, and fear long after the relationship has ended. Then there is vulnerable narcissism. Statements. The stuck factor in relationships with vulnerable narcissistic people is different. Instead of fear being the main trap, statements, the emotions that keep people stuck are pity and guilt. These are what I call the magnet emotions. Statements. These feelings pull people back in and make it incredibly hard to walk away. You feel sorry for them. You feel responsible for their pain. Statements. You feel guilty for even thinking about leaving. Vulnerable narcissism can look like anxiety. It can look like depression. In many cases, statements, those conditions may actually be present. For a long time, it may appear that the person is simply anxious or depressed. They may seem fragile, wounded, statements, or overwhelmed by life. They may talk about how hard everything is for them. They may talk about how no one understands them or supports them. Over time, statements, you may find yourself constantly trying to help, fix, reassure, or rescue them. Vulnerable narcissism often hides behind sadness, insecurity, and self-pity. It can be very confusing because the person doesn't always look aggressive or openly cruel. Instead, they may appear helpless, misunderstood, statements, or emotionally fragile. But underneath that presentation is still a deep sense of entitlement and self-focus. Statements. The relationship slowly becomes centered entirely around their emotional needs. Your needs shrink or disappear. Statements. You may feel like leaving them would make you a bad person. You may think, how can I walk away from someone who is suffering? That guilt keeps you stuck. Statements. You may worry that they won't survive without you. You may feel responsible for their mental health or emotional stability. Over time, statements, this dynamic becomes draining and exhausting, but the pity and guilt act like invisible chains. In both malignant and vulnerable narcissistic relationships, statements, people become stuck for different reasons, but the outcome is similar. They lose their sense of self. They question their reality. Statements. They feel trapped between fear, guilt, confusion, and responsibility. Understanding these dynamics is not about blaming the survivor. Statements. It is about naming the patterns that keep people trapped so they can begin to see the situation more clearly. The confusion, the fear, the guilt, statements, and the emotional exhaustion are not signs of weakness. They are predictable responses to prolonged manipulation, control, and emotional pressure. Statements. When someone finally starts to understand what they have been living in, it can be painful, but it can also be the first step toward clarity, safety, stateful freedom.